Ibrahim Traoré is planning to stay in power in Burkina Faso beyond July 2029. And why is July 2029 important? I'll explain all of that in a bit. My name is Tony. I'm a Ghanaian writer who lives in the US. On this channel, I talk about foreign policy and trade related issues. Now, let's get into July 2029. But we have to start from September 2022. September 30th, 2022, the coup d'etat that brought Ibrahim Traoré to power happened. And then in October 2022, the country's Transitional Legislative Assembly and the military government put in place something called the Transitional Charter. The Transitional Charter is sort of like a provisional constitution that will govern the country while they are still under military rule. The Transitional Charter said Ibrahim Traoré was going to stay in power until July 2024. And he will leave power in July 2024. Why is that? In the Transitional Charter, it was in place that the leader of the transitional government, Ibrahim Traoré, was not eligible to run for office to hand over bring a new government in power in July 2024, right? But then in May 2024, there was an amendment to the Transitional Charter. And that increased the transitional period by 60 months. So Ibrahim Traoré was eligible or was going to stay in power to July 2029. Remember what I just said? July 2029. However, there was a second amendment to the Transitional Charter. And that was that Ibrahim Traoré was now eligible to run for office before the July 2029, which means that Ibrahim Traoré could transition from a military ruler to a civilian ruler by July 2029, which, no matter how you feel about him, is good news because military governments are not the best forms of government, in my opinion. And so, if you like Ibrahim Traoré so much, you should be happy that he was planning to hold an election and become a civilian ruler by July 2029. And now your joy will be cut short. Well, in December 2024, last year, Ibrahim Traoré dissolved the government, right? And fired the Prime Minister Ditambela. I'll talk about Prime Minister Ditambela and why he was important to Ibrahim Traoré's rise in the future video. But let's move on. So it became clear that elections were not in his plans from then on because the Prime Minister and the government are usually very influential in the election process, right? And then he said elections are not a priority to him in December 2024. He said that. But the country still had an electoral commission, right? So in July 2025, this year, Ibrahim Traoré dissolved the electoral commission. The electoral commission was put in place by an earlier constitution that goes beyond Ibrahim Traoré. So he cannot just resolve it by his own power. That is why the Transitional Legislative Assembly on October 29th, 2025, last week, formally dissolved the Independent Electoral Commission. Why is this important? The Transitional Legislative Assembly was put in place by Ibrahim Traoré, right? The country has a National Assembly, which is like a parliament that was elected. But he unpicked the Transitional Legislative Assembly, and now they have resolved the, Independent Electoral Commission. Which means that Ibrahim Traoré's hold on power is now finally solidified. He has no form of check on his power outside of his circle. And anybody in his circle who has some fame or some, who is not a yes man, gets fizzled out. It has happened since he's been in power. He keeps reshuffling ministers, firing ministers, remove the prime minister. As long as somebody isn't showing 100% loyalty to him, they get moved out. This is typical, right? I'll put it this way. Personally, I've never really been a big fan of Ibrahim Traoré. I understand the argument for him. I understand why other people like him. But I am a big believer of institutions. If you want me to believe you have good intentions, convince me, right? Ibrahim Traoré, if he believes his ideologies were as powerful as he claimed them to be, he had the opportunity to convince the people of Burkina Faso. There was supposed to be an election before July 2024. He didn't do that, which means that time he didn't believe that he could be elected, or he didn't have the chance to be elected because the constitution prevented him from being elected. Now there have been amendments for him to be able to run, and he's still cancelling the elections. Why? I'll tell you why. I like to use real life historical data to support my point because I know my views are not held by everybody. Rawlings, the last military ruler of Ghana, transitioned to a civilian ruler on January 7th, 1993. How did this happen? Justice Annan, who is Ghana's first Speaker of Parliament in the Fourth Republic, was Ghana's de facto vice president under J.J. Rawlings' military rule. But Justice Annan is a former Supreme Court Justice of Ghana. He is a big institutionalist. He didn't think that it was right that Ghana was under military rule. He wanted Ghana to go to civilian rule. So he commissioned, a poll to find out if Ghanaians will vote for J.J. Rawlings if he runs as a civilian. And the poll found out that Ghanaians were overwhelmingly going to vote for J.J. Rawlings to be our president if he became a civilian. So that was one. And two, he noticed that elections are not necessarily predictable. Anything could happen. So he put it in the constitution that in case Rawlings lost the elections and he's moved out of office, he will be safe from the president that will come after him prosecuting him. He put that in lock. And then thirdly, he was able to engineer the election process in Ghana. This is important in the Ibrahim Traoré situation. Engineer the electoral process in Ghana because Afari-Gyan, a lot of Ghanaians trust Afari-Gyan, right? Afari-Gyan is an honest person. That is why all the parties in Ghana were happy Afari-Gyan was the electoral commissioner in Ghana. But Afari-Gyan is very, very close, or was very, very close to members of the NDC. So Rawlings and people in his party know that Afari-Gyan is not going to, upon them. Right? So they use the process. There are a lot of people in Ghana who believe that the 1992 election in Ghana was rigged. Whether you believe that or not, at least there was an election. And the process went as it's supposed to go. And even if they rigged the election based on the rules. What Ibrahim Traoré is doing away with the rules. And it is hard to trust somebody who doesn't follow rules. Rules are there for a reason. If you want to rig an election to stay in power, you have to do that within the confines of the rules. Vladimir Putin does that all the time. What's the name? North Korea, they do that all the time. Presidents around the world rig elections all the time. That is not my problem. I don't really think that elections have the tendency to be 100% fair because it's about power, and power is violence, right? My point is, elections are a show of respect for the people you govern. Elections are a way of you telling the people you govern that your views matter to me. The moment you do away with elections, what you are saying is that you don't care what the people think. And that is why Ibrahim Traoré is formally a dictator in my books. He has crossed the line from just a military ruler to a dictator in my books because he is chiseling away the institutions that can potentially hold him accountable. He could have staffed those institutions with people that will be loyal to him. That's his prerogative. He's the president. But chiseling away the institutions is a gross disrespect to the people. And it tells me that he doesn't believe that the people will vote for him if given the chance. Yes, that's what I think. He doesn't believe the people will vote for him if given a chance, because if he believed the people will vote for him, he would have held an election and have the people vote for him. I have written down some thoughts. Let me see if I exhausted those thoughts. That's why I keep scrolling, because I write a lot. I write about so many things, right? I wanted to go back to the May 2024 amendment to the Transitional Charter, which, one of the things that said was early elections were possible but conditional. Elections may be organized before this deadline if security situation permits. I'll give you an example, another example that I think is important here. In early 2000s, when Prime Minister Tony Blair of the UK led the UK to join America to start the war in Iraq, Tony Blair was very, very unpopular in the UK. And so there were calls for elections for Tony Blair to be removed. But Tony Blair realized that if the elections were held maybe 3 months or 6 months away from the point the calls were held for him, the opposition will have enough time to convince the people to vote him out. So he was going to lose the election. So he held the election within like a month. He announced the voting date within like a month so that people don't have the chance to campaign. You know what happened to Kamala Harris. And so he was able to stay in power by playing around with the rules, but he played within the rules. Ibrahim Traoré could have done that. He could have announced that let's hold the election next week. And nobody else will have time to campaign to win power in Burkina Faso, because elections are about convincing people. But he's not even man enough or strong enough to hold a sham election. He's not confident enough to hold a sham election even. That is why he has dissolved the Electoral Commission. I'm a very confident, strong person. I don't fear easily. The only time in my life I have been afraid for the future of Africa was on April 30th, 2025. I have always been bullish on Africa. I will always be bullish on Africa. But when it comes to the political future of Africa, April 30th, 2025 scared me. That was the day Ghanaians organized a protest in support of Ibrahim Traoré, asking for Ibrahim Traoré to become the leader of Africa. And other countries in Africa, youth in other countries in Africa also organized protests in support of Ibrahim Traoré. That scared me because the youth of Africa were openly championing the further empowerment of a military ruler. The history of Africa is all about military rulers coming to us with pretty words, stealing our hearts, and destroying our country. There's no single military ruler in the history of Africa that you're going to look at and say, this guy did a great job. Not one. This guy didn't abuse power. Not one. I will say some positive things about J.J. Rawlings because he gave over power. One of the very few people to do it in the fashion he did it. I think he was the first person in Africa to do it, and that set a precedent for Nigeria to follow and the rest. Right? We have a long history of charlatans like Ibrahim Traoré. That is why it scared me when the youth of Africa did not allow the past to be a prologue and allow. It's sad. It's scary, you know. Flirting with dictatorships never ends well for anybody. We need to think critically about the men we empower and how we empower them. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to this channel.